Hello, hello. Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to the fiscal year 25 Gaming Mitigation Fund final report info session walkthrough. We are going to get started in just a couple minutes here. Want to give just a couple more minutes for everyone to continue filtering in and logging on and getting on Zoom. So welcome and good morning. All right, it is 3 minutes after 10, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first couple slides are introductions anyway, so if anyone joins later or filters in then, that should be fine. So good morning. As I already mentioned, this is the fiscal year 25 Gaming Mitigation Fund final report info session and walkthrough. My name is Lillian Lee. I'm a program officer here at Mass Cultural Council. And I am specifically the program officer for the Gaming Mitigation Fund and will be doing the primary presentation today. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Sarah Glidden, who is the program manager on for portfolio organizations and operating grants for organizations, and Lindiana Flores, who works with Card to Culture as well as operating grants for organizations. And they'll be helping with some of the question moderation and putting some links in the chat as I mention them throughout the walkthrough. Just an overview of the meeting structures and norms and what that looks like. So we do have auto captions enabled for this meeting, and they should be available to all participants. And so just to turn those on, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a closed caption sign, and it should say show captions, and you should be able to click that button, which will enable captions for you as you're viewing today's webinar. In terms of asking questions, we do ask that you submit questions using the Q&A feature. Again, that will be at that bottom bar of your Zoom screen. And we will be answering them periodically throughout the session, as well as having a larger question section at the end. So if you realize last minute, oh, I meant to ask this during the walkthrough, you can always put it into that Q&A feature at any point, and we will come back to all unanswered questions at the end of the session. As I mentioned earlier, links will be placed in the chat as they come up. So for instance, when I mention guidelines or FAQs or things like that during the process of the presentation, a link will be placed in the chat that you can go to and just kind of have a record of that so it ties directly to it. And then today's webinar will be recorded and will be available on Mass Cultural Council's YouTube channel within a few business days after today's session. So pretty much all of our info sessions are available on that YouTube channel. It's a great place to go because we also have like some spotlight series, so it's a really good reference and resource if you haven't been on it. Our agenda for today. So we are going to briefly go over the final report in just like an overview and talk about the purpose of it. For those new to the Gaming Mitigation Fund, whose first year it is, just know that this is the first year we're doing a report for this program. So those who have been part of the gaming program in the past, you will not have had to fill out a final report because we have made it a 2-year program, meaning that there is no application for the next year of funding. We are implementing a final reporting requirement. As in previous years, the application for the next round served as the final report from the previous round. Because there is no application, we are implementing a separate final report. Then we'll do a brief walkthrough in the grants portal of the actual report itself, a sample report. We'll talk about fiscal 26 grant amounts and timeline, so what that will look like in terms of the deadline for the final report, and then what it will look like to calculate grant amounts, have fiscal 26 grants announced, etc. We'll have some resources and contact information available, and then the questions section. So the final report overview and purpose. Why are we doing a final report for this program? Well, the main purpose of the final report is to verify continued eligibility and gather funding factors for the fiscal 26 grant calculations. When we say verify continued eligibility, we're looking at basically everything that's in our guidelines and that we had already verified last year. We're just making sure that your organization continues to be eligible to be funded through this program. So we'll be looking at your organization status, making sure you're still meeting the nonprofit, municipally owned, or cultural affiliate bar. If your organization has a separate managing entity, ensuring that there is a valid contract that is for the length of this new grant period, because the application from fiscal 25 was specifically asking about that grant period. Now that we're in a new fiscal year, we need an updated contract. Ensuring that your organization is still a performing arts center and that you still are presenting touring entities. Gathering funding factors for fiscal 26 grant calculations. So this is what in the application, we had used the spreadsheet of performances to gather. So it's for those funding formula factors. So the total number of performances, the total number of performances by eligible touring entities, and total fees paid to eligible touring entities. We're gathering that in this final report, as that will be the basis of how we calculate fiscal 26 grant amounts. And then just a reminder that the deadline for this grant will be Thursday, December 4th at 11:59 p.m. Okay, so everything I just mentioned sounds a lot like what was on that fiscal 25 application. So how is this final report different from the application that you previously filled out? So first thing is there's no eligibility quiz. So, we already know or have verified that your organization was initially eligible, so we don't need you to take an eligibility quiz to determine if you can apply or not. The biggest change between the application and the final report is that there is no spreadsheet of performances required. So as I mentioned, we're still going to be asking you to give us the numbers for total performances featuring an eligible touring entity, and total fees paid to eligible touring entities, but we are not asking you to compile or upload the spreadsheet of performances as proof of that. You can still use that as a tool and a reference to help you determine which presented works or produced works do feature an eligible touring entity. If you would like, that's absolutely something available to you, but we do not require that to be uploaded this year for this final report. One of the other big changes is that in last year's application, we were looking at your organization's fiscal year 24 for those funding factors and expenses. For this final report, since it's the next year, we're going to be looking at fiscal year 24. I know for some organizations, their fiscal year 24, might have ended in March or June of 2024. And so you're like, well, can I do fiscal year 25? But because we're trying to get a consistent year when looking at the review for all organizations, some organizations are still in their fiscal year 25. And that's why we look at fiscal year 24, because it is closed for all organizations who are reporting. There are also some added sections and or streamlined questions. So that means that we have added back in impact and advocacy section. So one of the big changes made to the application last year was that we removed the impact over time section. We have added back in a section called impact and advocacy. However, they are not the same questions from the old impact over time. So they are just a couple of narrative questions as well as some questions about cross-sector work. And we'll go over that more when we do the actual walkthrough. By streamlined questions, because we are just verifying continued eligibility, we have taken out some pieces from questions in the application that were more in depth. So for instance, we're not asking for the spreadsheet of performances. If you're a multidisciplinary organization, we're still asking you to tell us the percentage spent on performing arts to verify your performing arts center, but we're not asking for a budget. Things like that. So we've kind of streamlined it to what are the most basic questions to confirm continued eligibility. So it's a little bit easier and faster to fill out than the full application in theory. Biggest note is that all guidelines and FAQs from last year still apply. So that means that when you're looking at total number of performances featuring an eligible touring entity, and total fees paid to eligible touring entities, that should still be using the guidelines from last year's application. So the definitions of a touring entity, what, you know, what fees can be spent on, none of that has changed from last year. And so you'll still reference those fiscal 25 guidelines if you have questions about definitions, determinations, etc. All right, we'll take a brief pause for questions before we move into the walkthrough itself in the grants portal.
There are no questions at this time.
Excellent. I'm doing an amazing job. No, okay. So this is just a screenshot of that welcome screen when you log into GMS. Sorry, that's our shorthand for grants management system, which I should use the full name for because not everyone knows our shorthand, the grants management system. So when I say grants portal, that's what I mean. And I'm just going to move over to that grants portal now. So just verifying with my colleagues that you can see the grants portal on the screen now.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So when you log into your grants portal, you should see this welcome screen, some basic navigation. When you're looking for a final report, you'll scroll down to requires attention and you'll see pending reports. They should be listed under your pending reports section. You'll see here it will have the due date. It's a sample report, so it doesn't have a due date, but you should see 12/04/2025 here. And it will have your gaming mitigation application ID and say Gaming Mitigation Fund. You'll click on Open to access the report. At any point in time, if you would like a PDF version of the report, so if you wanted to get a PDF to share with someone because you want other eyes on it or anything like that, you would just click this report summary button, and that will generate a PDF version of the report as it was when you last hit save draft. So make sure that when you're entering information, you're just hitting save draft all the time because anything can happen with technology. So I recommend hitting save draft every time you fill out a section just to be safe, but the report summary will always generate the most recently saved version of the annual report. Final report, excuse me. So the first thing here is participation and attendance. So this is new. This was not on the fiscal year 25 application. This is something we ask in all reports for all of our programs. It's part of our just data gathering and our reporting as a state agency and as a federal funds recipient, just so we have that information in general. Important to note here is that the Gaming Mitigation Fund program is specifically, the funds are restricted to touring entities. So you can pay for artist fees, you can pay for housing, etc. So when you're looking at this section, this note about this can include direct participants as well as audience members or attendees at any presentations or events that were part of the funded project or program. We are specifically talking about those projects featuring a touring artist. So whatever the funds that you received were spent on or allocated towards, those are the projects you're reporting on here. So you don't need to report on your whole year, but it does need to be a funded project or program within this grant period. And so you'll just have your in-person attendees. If it was a digital event and there were digital attendees, you would put that here. And then this section is auto-calculated for you once you hit Save Draft. Navigation notes. You can reach the next section either by hitting Next or by clicking on these headers up here, section headers up here. Any questions on participation and attendance before I move on to report details?
There are no questions at this time.
Perfect. Just want to make sure I don't miss anything. So
Thank
report details. This is the
Oh,
section. Oh,
actually, I'm sorry.
go
I
ahead.
do see a question. It looks like the attendance is for the period of 7/1/24 through 6/30/25 performance data based on our fiscal year. For us, those are two different time periods. Is it okay that
Yeah.
those time periods are different?
Yes. So you'll notice in the instructions for each section, it will tell you what period to report on. So you will be reporting on different periods for different sections. Participation and attendance, because this is specifically tied to the grant period and we want to know about the funded project or program, we are asking about the grant period. So the fiscal 25 grant period was July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. So only include information about funded projects or programs within this grant period for this specific section. And that we understand that's different from most organizations or some organizations' fiscal years. Completely fine. We know that, but we are specifically asking about this period of time for participation and attendance.
Great. And a second question,
Mhm.
in terms of attendees, is this for all presented performances or specifically for the ones where the organization is using the funds to cover expenses? How do
Yes,
you, sorry, go ahead.
specifically the ones that the organization is using the funds to cover expenses. So for instance, if you do, $2 million worth of presenting work a year, but your grant was $250,000, obviously not every performance is going to be a funded project or program. And so it's just whichever of those programs you have chosen to allocate these funds towards or these funds went towards, you would just enter attendance data there.
Thank you very much.
For the report details, and you'll notice again in the instructions that we are specifically asking about your organization's fiscal year 2024 for this section of the report. And the report details section is more or less just the application, but streamlined. So when I mentioned there are streamlined questions, this is that section. So this is where we're going to be capturing a lot of the information that we had previously captured on the application. So for instance, you'll see, does the Performing Arts Center, the applicant organization, have a separate managing entity? So this is for, a lot of organizations, if they're a municipal organization, but they contract out with a third party to actually manage their Performing Arts Center. If it's yes, you will have to still upload a contract, but you will not have to have them come in as a co-applicant. So we've made that change. Most organizations here will be no, so you won't have to worry about that question. Your fiscal year 2024 start and end date. As a reminder, this is for your organization, not Mass Cultural's fiscal year 2024. We want to specifically know about yours, and this should be a full 12-month fiscal year. So if your fiscal year 2024 was not a full 12-month fiscal year, let us know and we'll work with you to determine which year you should report on for this section. Also, if you don't let us know in advance and we do see that the dates provided are not a full 12-month fiscal year ending in 2024, we will reach out to confirm and to have revisions if necessary. So there will be a revisions period for this application, for this report, just as there was for the application. Total cash operating expenses is again your total cash operating expenses from fiscal year 2024. It is specifically cash expenses, so don't include any in kind or things like that. For this one, so we've streamlined this one. Instead of asking you to select a bunch of different categories, we're just simply asking, does your organization only present performing arts or are you multidisciplinary? If you only present performing arts, that's it. That's the only question you have to answer. If you are multidisciplinary, we are going to ask for the total cash operating expenses associated with performing arts. But again, we are not asking you to upload a budget. So you would just input the number here, and then once you save draft, it will auto-calculate the percentage for you. And just as a reminder, to continue to be eligible, you do have to have 50% or more of expenses going to the performing arts. Performance information. So this is basically the same section that was on the application, just with the difference of not requiring the spreadsheet. So all of these instructions are the same as they were last year. We're just asking for your fiscal 2024 information instead of 2023. So when we say total number of all performances, this is live presentations of performing arts for an audience that take place in Massachusetts, are available to the general public by free or paid admissions, and are presented or produced by the organization or by a producer renting the organization's venue. And then the next number is your total number of performances by eligible touring entities. And again, so you would take the number of total performances, determine which ones had an eligible touring entity. that's the number you put in here. And again, you can look at the guidelines and FAQs for those definitions if you need a reminder or a refresher of what is considered an eligible touring entity. You can also, if it helps, use the spreadsheet of performances just to help make those determinations if you're uncertain about any one artist or performer or show. You can also always email me and I will help you make that determination if necessary. Then we have your total fees paid to eligible touring entities. So this is for anyone included in this number of performances by eligible touring entities. What were the total fees paid to those? And fees can include compensation, housing, travel, as well as booking costs if you pay a third-party booking agent or company. The new question in this section this year is just asking if you've had any significant changes, so an increase or decrease of more than 20% in the number of presented performances or fees. And we're going to look at this and asking you to kind of look at last year's application and this year's application just to make sure this is kind of in place of that spreadsheet, helping catch if there might be either overcounting or undercounting in either section. And sometimes it's just, someone's model has changed. So one year maybe they could only do 20 performances and the next year they grew to 100 because that was always their plan to scale. So if we have that explanation here, then we know that the numbers look drastically different because of that change in presenting model and not because of any potential under or over counting when looking at the numbers. So that's just kind of a stopgap to help catch any potential errors and also to learn more about the presenting models and if there were changes at your organization and what that looks like. Any questions on this section before I move on?
There are no questions at this time.
Contract information is also the same from the application. This is just verifying that we have the correct information and most recent information for your contract authorized signatory and contract authorized officer. And again, these are the people at your organization who have the legal authority to sign contracts and to attest that the contract authorized signatory has the power to sign on your organization's behalf. This is just so when we get into contracting for your fiscal 26 grant amounts, we have this information. It's the most up to date it can be. And if there are any changes, we're made aware of it at this time. Impact and advocacy narrative. This is one of the new sections I was mentioning. This is one of the sections that, again, if you look at the instructions, we're asking about the grant period here. So this is, again, that July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025 grant period, because this is specific to the actual grant being given. And it just has two narrative questions and then one cross-sector question. I'll go over them briefly. So the first question we want to know is, how have the funds awarded through gaming mitigation impacted your organization's presenting work? We've included some sample topics of what you could talk about here. You're not limited to these topics. And please, if you're saying none of these topics are actually how it's impacted our work, that's completely fine. Feel free to answer in whatever way is most accurate to your organization. These were just examples if you were having trouble coming up with them. But it could include things like the number of touring entities booked using these funds, if and how the funds have helped your organization expand or maintain your presenting capabilities, and if and how the funds have allowed for growth in other areas of the organization. For instance, if, half of our festival is now covered by gaming mitigation, that leaves us more room to do X, Y, Z. Maybe perhaps an optimistic look at potential ways this has impacted your organization, but we do want to know as much detail as possible about how these funds are having a direct impact on the work that you're doing. And we would also like to know, kind of on the flip side of that, what are the biggest challenges your organization is facing as a performing arts presenter? So, there's an ever-shifting climate in the performing arts world, and in particular, the performing arts presenting world. So we would love to know, what are the challenges facing your organization? And so again, we're looking specifically like during the period of this grant. If we're thinking about the period of this grant, what were the challenges as your organization was, booking performances and doing that? So we are looking back a little bit, but when we look at fiscal 26, the next final report, start looking at the next period. So This is just to have a consistent period of time where we're looking at everyone's responses. And you're welcome to talk about the actual challenges you're facing now if you'd like. That's completely fine as well. But we should just ask that you note that if you do that. Cross-sector work. So what is cross-sector work? We define cross-sector work as any work your organization is doing to bring the cultural sector into other fields or vice versa. So for instance, if you are integrating arts with healthcare, so if you're part of maybe that art pharmacy program, or if you're a part of economic development, workforce training, climate resilience, we want to know if your organization is doing any of this work. And it does not have to be specific to the presenting work you're doing, but if it is, that's also fascinating and interesting. Um, I do want to note that we don't expect every organization to have cross-sector work. So if this doesn't apply to your organization, it's completely fine to put not applicable. This whole section, I didn't say this at the top, I should. The answers to these questions do not affect grant amounts. They do not impact your eligibility. They do not affect your grant amounts. They will not be kind of reviewed in terms of making determinations about how much money or if your organization should receive funding. They are purely for data gathering purposes. And so we can understand the the challenges and tribulations of the sector, understand how our money is impacting organizations in this sector, and give us a better picture for continuing to advocate for this program. So with cross-sector work, the agency is kind of making a push to do more advancement work and to get out into other fields and other sectors in the state and learn how we can kind of move forward and help the cultural sector by looking at other sectors and connecting them with other sectors. And so we really want to learn about organizations who are already doing this work. And it's completely fine if your organization is not doing that work, because we understand that this is kind of a niche section of work in the cultural sector. Not every organization will be doing it. That's completely fine. But if you are doing it, we want to know. And then we are asking for just a description of what that work looks like if you are doing it. And again, if you put not applicable here, you can just put not applicable here as well. Then our last section is photos for advocacy. As you'll notice in the PowerPoint, we have lots of pictures there. Anytime we do a blog post, we have a photo. We are doing more and more like organization spotlights, and anytime we share something on social media, we love to highlight and share photos from the organizations we're supporting. So having pictures uploaded by the organization here with photo credit and year included just helps us have kind of a folder and archive of images to pull from so that we can use those across all of our work to show the great work our organizations are doing. This is all an optional section. You don't have to fill out this section, but it would be incredibly helpful and we would greatly appreciate it if you could fill out this section. Any questions about any part of that report?
Um, a question about photographs and and consent of the folks who have been photographed, which I would say we would encourage you if you are doing photographs that include your audiences. Yes, you either need to notify them through signage or programs. If you are talking about photographs of performers, that's typically part of your agreement with those performers that photographs can be used for publicity purposes.
Yes, please only include photos here that you know can be used in publicity and that you have the right to share and offer in that way. Right, if there are no other questions, I'll move back over to the slideshow. All right, so moving on to fiscal year 26 grant calculations and timeline. So as mentioned, part of this report is helping us gather those formula funding factors so we can calculate your fiscal year 26 grant amounts. We're using the same formula that we used in fiscal 25 to calculate fiscal 26 grants. So it's just as a reminder, that formula is the percent of performances impacted and total fees paid to touring entities for the eligible performances. We are also, once again, including those equity impact points and applying them. So we did that for fiscal 25 as well. So it's the same method of grant calculation. Timeline of what that looks like. So December 4th, 2025, the final report is due. We're also including, just as like a note, we were calling it the year one report. So if you look at guidelines, at the guidelines currently on the website, you'll see year one report due. When year one is mentioned, it's that fiscal 25 final report. When year two is mentioned, we're talking about fiscal 26. So the next thing, once this final report is due, as mentioned, there will be a revisions period. So if your organization had any part of the application that needed a revision, so for instance, if the wrong fiscal year dates were input or if they were a non-12-month fiscal year, we would reach out to your organization and just confirm what the dates are. And, if it's a non-12-month year, additional revisions might be needed, but your organization will be notified if revisions are needed. So if you don't hear from us about revisions, it meant no revisions were needed, so you should be fine. Your organization will have an additional period to get those revisions in until December 18th by 11:59 p.m. And I do want to really note, as stated in our guidelines, that, if your organization does not submit this final report by that December 4th deadline originally, then your organization will not receive a fiscal 26 grant amount. Because we are using the fiscal year 25 final report to gather the data needed to calculate fiscal year 26 grants, if we don't have the information needed to calculate a grant amount, then we cannot calculate the grant amount. So that is a hard deadline in order to receive continued funding in year two of the grant. That's also partially why we're offering that revisions process for 2 weeks this time. I think we usually do a week for revisions, but just to ensure that we don't want someone to not get funded in fiscal 26 for a correctable error. That would be unfair. So we are offering a revisions process to ensure that we have the most accurate, correct data we can for those fiscal year 26 grant calculations. In terms of grant announcements for fiscal year 26, those will be made in late February or early March after the programs committee meeting. So our council meets and approves all grants and looks at the lists, and announcements will be made after that date in late February or early March. That will also be when the contracting period happens. So the contracting period will happen sometime after the grant announcements are made, and grant payments aren't made until the contracting process is done. So everything will kind of happen in that spring 2026 few months. And then you'll note that there is in June 2026 another final report due. So this will be kind of the closeout for year two of the report as well, because there is a new application cycle happening in fall of 2026 for fiscal year 27 funding. I don't have specifics on what that year two final report will look like, if it will be changed, how it will be different yet. We will announce that as we are closer to the time. Any questions about, sorry, nope, I have one more slide. Resources and contact information. This is just letting you know what is available to you to help you fill out this annual report. Because the report details section with the total performances featuring an eligible touring entity, and total fees paid to eligible touring entities are all following the fiscal year 25 definitions, guidelines, and requirements, I highly recommend you go through those guidelines, those FAQs. If you want to look through the fiscal 25 info session just at those specific definitions again, those are all resources you have available to you if you just kind of need a refresher, because it was a year ago. A lot happens in a year, you forget a lot of stuff. But just if you need a refresher on what those definitions look like and how we're defining touring artist, those are great references available to you. You can always email me or give me a call. And if you're having technical issues or technical problems with any part of GMS, which is our grants management system, that grants portal, I recommend contacting our grants team, as they kind of handle any of those. Like if you're having login issues or if it keeps kicking you out, it won't accept your password, things like that. My knowledge of the grants portal extends to a certain extent, and beyond that, our grants team kind of takes it over for technical issues. So I highly recommend them if you're having any of those types of issues with the system. Any questions?
There are no open questions at this time.
Okay, great. In that case, this will be recorded. This is being recorded, and will be available within a few business days. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for coming. And again, if you have any questions as you're filling out this report, please reach out to me.
We do have a quick question about the guidelines about what makes a touring artist. We can put
Sure.
that one in.
Sorry, what was the question?
Uh, can you go over the guidelines about what makes a touring artist? I think this is an organization that has its own productions, but also does some presenting or has guest artists.
Sure. If you want to email me with specific questions, I'd be happy to
Great.
answer them then. I don't have kind of it prepared today to go into the specifics about that, but I'd be happy to talk to you about your specific situation, especially since produced works are a little bit different than most presented works.
Okay, thank you.
All right. If there are no other questions, then thank you for joining, and have a great rest of your day. Feel free to email me with any specific questions about things like